Have you ever wondered why some truths are etched in stone while others vanish into time? Why some books are deified and others condemned to oblivion? Through the centuries, veiled in the dust of gods and empires, you sense. Not everything was spoken. Not everything was allowed to be heard. You find yourself in a library without walls, sprawling across the desert of your memory. Here lie fragments of the sacred, uprooted verses, voices muted by doctrine, symbols shackled in the chains of canon. Among them rests the Book of Enoch, an orphaned text, cast out from the collection of the permitted. You reach for it, like for a light you've always been missing. This book whispers of stars from which those you call angels descended, of unions between the celestial and the earthly, of forbidden love and broken boundaries. Not a parable, not a myth, but a map leading to places you were taught never to seek. Why was it removed? Who decided you weren't ready to know? Who rewrote your story? You feel a thin veil lift from your centuries. It's not rage that takes hold of you, but clarity. You realize silence was not your choice. Someone else placed deafness in your ears. Someone else forged holy texts, not for truth, but for control. And now you stand at the threshold, not at the gates of paradise, but before a door left closed for ages. Your steps echo in the void, not outside, but within. Where once was fear of the unknown, now awakens awareness. You remember the spirit is no captive. It is a traveler, and the Book of Enoch is no threat, but a mirror. It doesn't tell you what to believe. It shows you who you were before they gave you a name. Now it is you who decides whether to listen to that voice, not the voice of a prophet, nor that of a ruler, but a voice from within, returned from exile, one that always lived inside you, yet was sealed away. Today you are not reading lines. You are reading lost memory. Today you are not staring at a text. You are gazing into an abyss they hoped you'd never see. But you have already taken the first step. You did not learn of the discovery through news reports or books, but as a shiver crawling down your spine. Somewhere in southern Ethiopia, in a land that held the bones of kings and ancestors, a manuscript was unearthed. It did not gleam with gold. No trumpets heralded it. And yet the world shifted that day, quietly, like the breath that changes when realization dawns. This text was not new. It was ancient, forgotten, erased. The paper bore the imprint of pain and truth, as though every line had been written in the blood of those who knew that one day you would find it. Its emergence was not an event. It was an omen. You felt the old structures within you begin to fracture. Because if this book is true, then everything you were taught may be illusion. And you are not alone. Thousands of souls across the world began to awaken, not from words, but from vibration. This manuscript triggered a strange resonance. It did not persuade. It stirred. It felt as if it already knew you, and therein lay its threat to the system. It spoke not to the mind, but to the spirit, and the spirit cannot be contained. You remember how you used to search for answers in the sanctioned, in canonical verses, in filtered translations, in official histories. But now you understand. Light is not always kept in temples. It hides in caves. Truth is not where the noise is loudest. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, in scattered lines, charred edges, the scent of ash and ancient wax. This discovery did not merely coincide with the age of awakening, it became its very pulse. For you live in times where lies crack beneath the weight of inquiry, where those who were silent for centuries finally begin to speak. This is no accident. This is a challenge, and you feel it sinking into your bones, not to frighten, but to awaken. Some will call it a forgery. Others will dismiss it as nonsense. But you know, truth does not require permission. It simply is. It cannot be authorized, just as the sunrise cannot be legislated. It comes when you are ready. And if you hear its call now, it means you are no longer asleep. You go deeper now, into a space where the text ceases to be a page and becomes a revelation. And the further you walk, the more you see. Everything you once believed about good and evil, about heaven and earth, was far too simple, like a child's worldview drawn in black and white chalk. But within the Book of Enoch, another spectrum reveals itself. It tells you of those who descended, not in disgrace, but with purpose. The fallen, not because they failed, but because they chose to abandon height in order to touch flesh. And in that convergence the Nephilim were born, beings whose very existence disrupts all you've assumed about boundaries between realms. The Nephilim are not monsters nor saviors. They are knots between light and shadow. Their blood holds both stars and clay. Their power lies not in brute force, but in shattering the categories. They force you to ask, what if evil is not always evil? What if the mixing is not sin, but key? You feel a tremble of inner dissonance. Enoch's words sound like music too complex for old ears. They draw you into the realm of paradox, where falling becomes sacrifice and union is deemed crime by those who fear blending. And then you realize you too are a result of unions. Within you is a mix of blood, of memory, of destiny. Enoch does not judge. He records. He does not call you to worship, but invites you to ponder. He tells of how the Nephilim altered the earth, taught humanity metallurgy, healing, the tracking of stars. They brought knowledge, and for this they were labeled enemies. Not because they brought evil, but because they disrupted the monopoly on light. You recall how you were taught to fear those who are different, those who bring the strange, those who do not fit. But now you see, fear is a tool and truth is a process. And in that process, the Nephilim are not a mistake. They are a mirror. They return to you the ability to perceive complexity, ambiguity, life, and you begin to sense you carry this memory too, not just of earth. You are not just a body. You are the chronicle of a forgotten choice. You are the fruit of worlds colliding. And perhaps that is why you found this path. Because within you, the call still echoes, the call of those who once descended to remind you, you are more than you believe. You begin to wonder what makes a person worthy of remembrance? Blood spilled on the battlefield? Fear imposed upon the masses? Or perhaps the quiet with which one walks through the ages, carrying a light that others feared? Enoch did not die. You hear this again and again, like a bell tolling across the fields of eternity. He was taken, alive, in body and spirit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as a sign. His disappearance was not an ending, but a precedent. He crossed a threshold no one dared to step beyond. And so he was removed, not as a heretic, but as a threat. Because if you believe that death is not the only path, then you will no longer fear it. Canon is not always the temple of truth. Sometimes it is a prison with gilded bars. And Enoch became the one whose very existence cracked its walls. He knew what could not be systematized. He spoke of entities, of the fall, of unions between worlds, of memory before birth. And that terrified those who wrote the boundaries of permission. You feel it. His name was erased not because it was false, but because it was alive. Enoch is inconvenient. He does not fit roles. He does not serve power. He says, you too can witness the heavens. You too can be taken, and that is far too dangerous for those who rule through fear. And yet he remained, in whispers, in legends, in the dust of ancient ink. His voice was never silenced. It was hidden. But memory does not obey decrees. You read his lines and feel he speaks to you, not from the past, from the timeless, from the space between the words. He does not preach. He guides. You begin to realize that his ascension is not a miracle. It is a reminder that flesh need not decay, that knowledge can free not just the mind, but the body, that spirit can overcome the laws of matter. And then you look at the sky differently, not upward, but inward. Because Enoch did not rise above. He descended within, into the place you are still afraid to look, but it is there that your return begins. You begin to understand. Truth never truly disappears. It merely changes form and waits to be recognized again. And if in one part of the world it is burned, buried, forbidden, in another it survives in ash, is passed through breath, and lives in the cracks of time. So it was with the Book of Enoch. What the Western Church rejected, Ethiopia preserved. Where altars stood silent for centuries, the elders did not forget. They did not abandon the text, even when it became inconvenient. It remained not in display cases, nor in universities, but in the veins of those who walked barefoot across the land, carrying the book hidden close to their hearts. They kept it not for power, but for spirit, not for doctrine, but for memory. You look at the map and suddenly realize the axis of truth has shifted. The center of the world, as you were taught to see it, was merely a projection. And now you see, not all greatness is Western, and not all forgotten things are errors. Sometimes the edge of the world becomes its heart. Sometimes silence speaks more than sermons. The Ethiopian trace is not just a geographic curiosity. It is a living thread leading to what could not be erased. A temple where there was no gold, but there was truth. A people who did not seek dominion, but preserved knowledge. And you feel it in their gestures, their songs, their script, what once seemed lost. They never tried to explain. They simply continued to remember. You realize how history can be a fragment assembled to serve empires, and how dangerous it is to believe only what is sanctioned. A book rejected by popes survived because of those deemed primitive, but perhaps they were closer to the heavens precisely because they never tried to control it. And now, as you read the words kept safe in a dusty monastery on a mountain slope, you feel, this is no accident. This is a call, a thread stretched across centuries. And it is up to you whether to follow it further. Because in that trace lies not only Enoch. Within it you find yourself before you were rewritten. You approach the texts never spoken from the pulpit. They don't decorate bookstore shelves, and they are not quoted in sanctuaries. Yet they live, they breathe, they haven't lost their power because they never sought control. The Apocrypha are not rebellion. They are the whisper of another truth left between the lines. You read the Gospel of Thomas and hear a voice free from drama, yet filled with depth. Christ there does not judge, does not threaten, he guides. He invites you to seek within, not beyond. He says, the kingdom is inside you and around you. It is not about obedience. It is about awareness, about awakening. Then you come to the first apocalypse of James, to words spoken to one who is afraid. There is no fear of hell, no demands for submission. There is a path of the soul passing through veils. And this is not rejection of God. It is a return to Him beyond the walls. But most powerfully, you pause at the words of Mary. Not the one they turned into a sinner to dim her light, but the one who spoke with the teacher, challenged him, understood, questioned. The Gospel of Mary is not a protest of women. It is the voice of truth that was silenced. You feel it. Women were not background. They were carriers of light. They were removed because their voices carried clarity, not submission. And clarity terrifies those who build systems. But in their stories, there is love, strength, purity. Not the kind that demands sacrifice, but the kind that grants freedom. And you understand, the Apocrypha do not contradict truth. They expand it. They were never meant to destroy, but to remind, truth has many voices. And if you hear only one, you are not hearing truth, but dictate. Truth is like light through a prism. It refracts, it multiplies. You do not reject the canon, you simply stop fearing to hear the other. Because fear is the ancient guard at the gate of knowledge, and you no longer bow to him. You open the gate, and hear, beyond it, a voice. It does not shout. It speaks through your heart. It has always been with you. You've learned not to laugh at legends, because you've realized myth is not fiction. It is memory frozen in imagery. And now, when you hear of giants on the Solomon Islands, you no longer dismiss it. You look more closely. You listen more deeply. Because deep down you know a story may hold a truth ripped from books, but not from hearts. They speak of towering figures hiding in the mountains, concealed within jungle shadows. People tell of eyes glowing at night, of strength that snapped trees like twigs. Some claim they found bodies, bones too large to belong to man. Scholars remained silent, records vanished, but elders kept speaking, and children kept believing. In these stories you hear echoes of those once called Nephilim, beings born of union between worlds, those who descended and those who stayed. They were not supposed to exist, yet they did. They had no place in textbooks, but they lived in songs, drawings, fears, and tales. They became shadows because the light refused to illuminate them. You ask yourself, why are those who seek to prove their existence ridiculed? Why are maps erased, reports hidden, witnesses mocked? Perhaps because to acknowledge them is to admit that history is incomplete, that it was trimmed intentionally, that there are gaps no one dares to fill. But you no longer fear those gaps, because you understand it is within them that the key lies. The giants of the Solomon Islands are not merely creatures, they are archetypes. They are symbols of forbidden knowledge, a reminder that the story of humankind is more complex, deeper, stranger than you were allowed to believe. You feel an ancient recognition stir inside you, as if you once heard heavy footsteps through the trees, as if you carry in your own blood an echo of those who were called wicked simply because they could not be controlled. And then you stop dividing tale from truth, because you see now the line between them was imagined. The world has always been layered, and if you want to know truth, you must listen even to the whisper of the earth where bones are buried, even to the breath of the forest that remembers everything. You now enter the realm of shadows, where truth no longer shines, but burns, where each symbol is not just an image, but a seal, where fear is not an enemy, but a gatekeeper. You begin to see the horrors of Scripture are not warnings, but revelations. And if you're willing to look, they unfold not as punishments, but as keys. You read about Leviathan, not from the outside, but from within. It is not a sea monster, not a beast of tales. It is the energy of chaos, drawn from the depths, not to destroy, but to shake. Leviathan does not come to kill, it comes to break open. It is the embodiment of those forces you've buried beneath the mask of logic. Instincts, passion, darkness. All the things they called sin, but were in truth. Raw potential. It swims inside you. It is not outside. Its jaws don't open in the ocean. They open the moment you meet your true self. The abyss within. That which you fled. Lust, rage, fear, pain. And you realize Leviathan is not your enemy. It is your mirror. The locusts from Revelation, you remember them? Strange beings with faces like men, hair like women, and iron breastplates. Their sound, like chariots thundering. You think, this is a nightmare. But look closer. This isn't punishment. It's the invasion of awareness. It's the image of how truth tears into a mind unprepared to awaken. They sting not the flesh, but the mind. They are symbols of collapsing structures, cracks forming in your beliefs. They enter your thoughts and thunder. They shake loose the illusions. You try to resist, but feel you can't, because they are you, your shadow, your forgotten self, returning home. And then the riders, white, red, black, pale. You've feared them since childhood, but you are no longer a child. You read them anew, not as doom, but as metaphor. The white bears a bow. He comes first. He doesn't kill. He reveals. He is the first awakening, the moment you see that life is a stage and you were a sleeping actor. The red, war, not outside, inside. The battle with all you built to avoid feeling, with the defenses, habits, masks. The black, scales, weighing, the moment you evaluate your life, your choices, your thoughts. It is not judgment, it is the crossroad. You look into your soul and ask, how much here is real? The pale, death, but not the kind that scares, the death of the old self, the ego, the mask, the death of illusion behind which truth emerges. And so you stand, surrounded by these beings. But you are not afraid, you do not flee, because you know they came not to destroy, but to awaken. They are not the end, they are the passage. They are the rite of initiation that requires not a sword, but honesty. You cannot walk around them, but you can walk through. You realize all these demonic forms that once terrified you were distortions, legends crafted not to understand, but to control. But you no longer live in fear. You are a seeker, and a seeker knows all that frightens holds power. All that is rejected holds a lesson. All that hides is a doorway. You read the text again, not as a prophecy of terror, but as a map of transformation. Because apocalypse does not mean catastrophe. It means unveiling, revealing, breaking open. And you feel it right now, happening within you. You are not reading the book is reading you. You feel old, meanings die. A temple of fear collapses within you. Dogma crumbles, and in its place, clarity, not despair, but freedom. You no longer ask what Leviathan means or who the writer is, because you know they were guardians. They were the figures at the edge of your rebirth. You pass through them, slowly, without panic, eyes open, heart open. You do not fight, you accept. And that becomes your key. Fear loses its grip when you stop running. Hell vanishes when you pass through it, not with curses, but with comprehension. You emerge, changed, not greater, clearer. You didn't gain power, you lost falsehood. And now, as the darkness parts, you see, behind every terror stood truth. Behind every demon, a lesson. Behind every fear, a path. And it was always inside you. Now you see, every word that made it into the canon was chosen, and every word that didn't was excluded, not by heaven, by men, and not always for truth. More often, for order, because order is easier than truth. Truth disturbs, order pacifies. And now, stirred from centuries of editing, you awaken and ask, who held the pen when your faith was written? You learn councils, decisions, lists, Nicaea, Carthage, Trent, men in robes of authority, deciding which books were divine and which dangerous. And suddenly you realize it wasn't a search for light, it was a battle for monopoly over it, because light shared among many cannot be controlled. You were told the scripture was infallible, but now you see it is translation. Translation from tongue to tongue, from meaning to meaning, from spirit to structure. And you begin to ask, how many truths were lost between lines? How much was turned to dust in another revision? You read how da'at, knowledge, became mere information. How ruach, breath, spirit, wind, became a cold abstraction. How even the mother stone vanished entirely. You notice how what was alive became dead, how symbol became sentence, how soul was reduced to diagram. You feel language is a key, but if the key is reforged, the door no longer opens. And so you seek the real, not the exact, but the true, not the literal, but the living. Because you know God is not in the words. He is in the breath between them. And if you learn to hear silence, you'll hear more than you were ever allowed. You discover that many early texts were not lost, but destroyed, burned, rewritten, labeled heresy simply because they gave humans strength instead of dependence. They said, "The kingdom is within you." And that was a threat to a system built on middlemen. You begin to see how censorship hid behind dogma, how control was called care, how editing became purification. But now you read between the lines. You feel the vibration of the words shift, not because God left, but because he was replaced by structure. You see how the feminine was erased, how Mary became a sinner, how Sophia vanished from the dialogue, how the words of Christ to Magdalene became inconvenient, because the feminine is fluid, intuitive, alive, and therefore uncontrollable. So they exiled it, not with curses, with silence. You open the pages and feel someone buried fire beneath ash, but the fire never died. It waited, and now you, not a scholar, nor priest, nor prophet, begin to unearth it, quietly, gently, like an archaeologist searching not for artifact, but for breath. And what you find is not a new text, it is new vision. You understand. Truth always was. But it was wrapped in robes, framed in titles, locked in form. It was made official, to be forgotten. But now you hear it, not the voice of authority, the voice of silence. It doesn't command, it reminds. You no longer believe in infallibility, not because all is false, but because all is filtered. And you feel, if you want to find light, walk where it was hidden, where it was banned, erased, burned. Because that's where it went, like a seed into soil, like a word into heart. You realize every era had its own translation, its own censorship, its own fear. But you have your own path. You are not bound to believe what was handed down. You can begin to listen anew. And then translation becomes not distortion, but passage, not error, but gate. Because what you reclaim is not letters. You reclaim the fire between them. You see how the books that spoke not of sin but of potential vanished. Where God was not judge, but breath. Where man was not fallen, but asleep. Where the path was not narrow, but deep. These books disappeared, but you did not. You remain. And so they live again, in you. You've reached the end, but there is no end, because truth is not linear. It is not a destination, it is a pulse. Not an answer, but a breath. And now, standing at the edge of the known, you finally understand. You were never seeking facts. You were seeking yourself. You look back, not with your eyes, but with your inner gaze. You see the path, words that no longer sound the same, fears that became teachers, symbols that melted and revealed light. Everything that frightened you became a tool. Everything rejected became a bridge. Everything hidden unveiled itself within you. You remember there was a time you believed everything worth knowing was written in books. Then, a time when you thought books concealed the truth. Now you know, truth is not in pages, nor in walls, nor in temples. It is in you, not as metaphor, but as reality. You are not a vessel for belief. You are its source. You understand, the Book of Enoch was only an entrance, a spark that lit the dry soil of your spirit. It didn't give you truth, it opened the door. The truth you carried out yourself, from the dark, from the pain, from the whisper. You are a seeker, but you no longer search outward. You reclaim. You reclaim yourself from exile, the one you were, before the name, before the fear, before the program. You reclaim the one who knew without proof, who felt without permission, who was connected, not through intermediaries, but directly, to heaven, to earth, to self. You feel this path was never about knowledge. It was about courage, the courage to see, the courage to collapse others' walls and build an inner temple, not crowned with a cross, but resonating with silence, a temple of breath, of warmth, of presence. You are not the product of teachings. You are the voice that returns, and this return has a purpose, not to convince, not to argue, but to ignite, to remind, not for everyone, not for the masses, but for those who will also remember. Because when one awakens, the structure of sleep begins to tremble. And you know, awakening is pain. It strips you of comforting simplicity. It peels the skin from illusions. It leaves you bare before yourself. But only in this bareness is fire born, Not rage, not pride, but presence, a light that doesn't blind, but warms. You are not chosen, you are witness. Witness to the ancient contract signed before words, before bodies, before time. A contract of a soul that said, I will go into flesh, to remember. And you remembered, not everything, but enough to never sleep again. Now you know you cannot save everyone, you cannot prove truth, you cannot force the path, but you can be the light. You can walk, you can breathe with an open heart, and by this alter the field around you, not as a mission, as a way of being. You return to the world, not with a message, but with silence, not with weapons, but with attention. You do not teach, you presence. And this is the loudest word you can ever speak. Because truth no longer needs speeches. It is within you, in how you look, how you pause, how you feel. You did not conquer, you did not finish. You began. That which has no form, no name, but lives like fire between your fingers, like a song without sound, like a trail left in ash by those who walked before. You are part of that song, not a verse, but a rhythm. And all you must do is not forget. Not forget that you're not here to fit in. You are here to be. Not forget that every step is a choice, to sleep again or to go deeper. Not forget that you are, not a role, but presence. Not forget that beyond darkness there is always light, and it waits in you.